From To Keto LLC, it's Keto Woman Podcast with Daisy Brackenhall.
Hello Keto lovelies, I'm Daisy Brackenhall and I've spent most of my life struggling with my weight and confidence and have always had a difficult relationship with food. Even when I finally got to my target weight, after weight loss surgery and eating low carb, I couldn't maintain it and I was miserable. Keto has given me the freedom to fall in love with food again, without the constant gain, loss, guilt, virtue cycle of before. Health and happiness is where it's at now, running on fat. Welcome to the Keto Woman Podcast. Each week I'll be chatting to inspirational women, maybe even the odd man, to discover the secrets to their success so that I can share them with you. So what is keto? Keto is a way of eating that enables you to switch your body's main fuel source from sugar to fat. Who doesn't want to be a fat burner, right? But how do we achieve this? A great place to start is by keeping carbs to 20 grams or less per day. So things like leafy greens and above ground vegetables, plus some nuts and seeds and the incidental carbs you find in things like dairy. Moderate protein scaled to your lean body mass, and then fat to satiety. Once you're in the swing of things, you can tweak it to suit you. Make your own personalised keto. I'll be asking my guest each week what their keto looks like to show you just how flexible and fabulous this way of eating can be. I'm not a doctor, and most of my guests won't be either, so we can't give you medical advice. It's always best to work with your own doctor because they know you and your medical history and so have access to the bigger picture. Thank you, Rebecca Smith, for supporting me in this podcast by making a pledge at my Patreon page. Do you want to hear your name here at the top of the show? Are you enjoying this podcast and would like to help me make more episodes? Then head over to my Patreon page at patreon.com/Keto Woman or hit the support button on the Keto Woman podcast website. It means a great deal to me and you will get to headline the show just like Rebecca did today. This week's extraordinary woman is Rosie Doyle. Rosie is originally from Yorkshire and now lives in Edinburgh with her husband and dog. She works as a management trainer and personal development coach. She was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis in 2016 and rediscovered low-carb, high-fat in order to lose weight before a consultant appointment. To her surprise, not only did she lose weight, but her remaining RA symptoms of joint pain, muscle cramps and fatigue disappeared. She was able to come off the most toxic autoimmune drugs, which had failed to control her symptoms, and finally normalise her inflammatory markers. Thanks to low-carb, high-fat, she also lost 24 kilograms in excess weight and has finally learnt to manage her addictive eating tendencies. She now wants to spread the word about the health benefits of keto and campaign to change orthodox nutrition advice through her Facebook page, Low Carb Hedonist. I had a great chat with Rosie. We have a lot of things in common, and it was one of those interviews that really just felt like a catch-up with an old mate. I hope you enjoy listening in to our chinwag. Welcome, Rosie, to the Keto Woman Podcast. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Daisy. Very excited to be here. Glad for the opportunity.
Well, it's wonderful to be talking to you. And you are almost in the same time zone as me. You're in Edinburgh, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm in Edinburgh, so I'm an hour ahead of you. Ahead of you.
Hour behind. I'm ahead of you.
Behind? Oh, yeah.
Lovely city by all accounts. I haven't been, but it's somewhere on my list that I'd really like to go to, Edinburgh.
It's beautiful. As you can hear from my accent, I'm not originally from Edinburgh. I'm from the north of England. But yeah, Edinburgh is a fantastic city. Really easy to get around. So yeah, I definitely recommend it for a trip.
How long have you lived there?
This time round about 10 years. I came up here to university, first of all.
Ah, that happens a lot, doesn't it?
Over 30 years ago. Well, I left again. I left for quite a long while, and then we came back about 10 years ago, and we're settled here again now.
Lovely. And what with all the awful things that are going on in Britain, really, with Brexit and all the rest of it, things in a lot of ways seem to be much better north of the border, from what I can make out. You have a lot of better policies when it comes to education and all sorts.
Yeah, I was going to be very careful and avoid things like politics, but yeah, absolutely. I'm very happy to be in Scotland. Yeah, and kind of, it wasn't a choice to come to Scotland. It wasn't that kind of choice. I came because of work. But now that I'm here, I'm really proud of it as a small nation doing a lot of really good things.
Yes, I think that's very typical, actually, of people in Scotland to be very proud of where they live, which I think is nice. A very dear friend of mine, Kirsten, is actually the woman responsible for getting me into keto. She lives very near Edinburgh. So
right.
Definitely a place I want to visit.
Yeah, well, I would definitely recommend it. Maybe before you haven't got access without a visa.
It seems incredible, doesn't it?
But you haven't got much time for that, so.
Exactly. Anyway, enough talk about the hideousness of Brexit. Tell me about you.
So I am 55. In fact, I turned 55 2 days ago. So only just 55.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you. And as I said, I live in Edinburgh. I live here with my husband. I work as a management trainer and personal development coach. So I spend my time running training courses and workshops and working one-to-one with people, helping them perform better at work or frankly, from my perspective, I just want people to be happier. So that's what I do for a living. And other than that, the thing that's been dominating for the last few years has been these health problems that I've had, and my discovery that I could use a low-carb diet, a keto diet, to really make radical positive changes to my health and well-being. So that's my current obsession, really, I think.
It's a good obsession to have, isn't it?
Well, I don't know whether my friends think that. They're probably sick to death of hearing me rant on about it. But yeah, it has been the story of certainly the last 5 years in my life has been dealing with that.
So tell me a bit about what led you to go looking for this magical solution. It sounds like it's going to turn out to be, but what led you to find something in the first place? Well,
I knew like what I called the Atkins diet from 18 years ago. I've been really quite seriously overweight for 20 years, I would say, certainly 18 years, and I can't even remember how I found it in the sort of pre-social media days, but I did discover Atkins, got Atkins' book, read Gary Taubes, read Protein Power, and was successful in the short term on a couple of occasions in using Atkins-style eating to lose weight. But then the dreaded sugar had its claws in me, and it was always a problem to keep off it. But it was kind of my go-to diet of choice if I ever did it. But increasingly, as I got older, I'd be the sort of person that would decide on a Sunday night that tomorrow I was going to go low carb again. And possibly, like by Monday night, I was already, eating toast or chocolate or what have you. But what happened really to change things was I developed these health problems, which probably were going on for about 8 to 10 years. I developed a lot of joint pain. I was also very fatigued, but I think I just thought I was getting old and was, had things that I was unhappy about. But looking back, there was a lot of fatigue. And so I even ended up going to being referred to a surgeon for knee problems, and he diagnosed osteoarthritis. I ended up with very bad hips and things. And it just got worse and worse. Until about 5 years ago, I ended up going to see a rheumatologist who at that point diagnosed fibromyalgia, which is this chronic pain condition that, basically there's no real treatment for. And this, I must be honest, was despite the fact that I was what you call serum positive. So my mother had rheumatoid arthritis, and my blood tests suggested that I was at least vulnerable to it. But at the time of the diagnosis, I wasn't showing any really clear symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis. And then for 2 years after that, I basically got worse and worse and worse. And looking back, I had like untreated rheumatoid arthritis for 2 years anyway. Asked for a re-referral, got a diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis. I think I was the only person in the world who at that point was glad to have a diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis, because I knew from a couple of friends actually that have the disease that these days there is treatment for it. That wasn't the case for my mother, but now there is treatment.
It's strange, isn't it? Often that it like you say, it can be a relief just to get a diagnosis, just so that you've then got something that you can tackle. I was wondering if you could just sketch out the difference, because you mentioned that you were diagnosed first of all with osteoarthritis, and now the diagnosis is rheumatoid arthritis. Perhaps you could just sketch out, what the difference is, because arthritis is a massive umbrella that different things fall under, but there are different characteristics, aren't there, for the different types and different causes? And
yeah, sure. Thanks for that question. It's a good idea to do that. So osteoarthritis gets talked about as a wear and tear disease. So osteoarthritis happens in certain joints, and knees are very common, fingers are very common. And what it is the cartilage between the joints it erodes. And it can be a really painful disease. It's not just wear and tear in the sense that if you run a lot or you jump a lot that you get it. There's obviously some people are more susceptible to it, but that is dealt with usually by some steroid injections, maybe to ease the inflammation that happens thanks to the pain and the rubbing of sometimes bone on bone, and eventually surgery. But it's treated as a kind of localized problem, a joint problem. Rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune disease. So in rheumatoid arthritis, your body attacks your own joints and attacks the cartilage. And it's identified through pain, obviously, and also swelling often. And often people get red, swollen joints, which I didn't get, these red joints that people often get. Also, inflammatory markers. So there's something that you can get rheumatoid antibodies tested. And if you've got that, they don't know you've definitely got it, but it's a clue that you might have it. But you basically have your inflammatory markers checked. So CRP in the UK and also ESR. And then they just kind of, you get an ultrasound as well. But the point about rheumatoid arthritis is autoimmune in nature, and it is treated through immune suppressant drugs. And it's a disease that attacks the whole system. So you don't just have it in one joint, and it is subject to flares and all of this kind of thing. So that's rheumatoid arthritis.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Whenever you have any kind of autoimmune disorder, well, two things to say about it really is that the end result is very similar. It's similar with my experience with underactive thyroid. The end result is similar, but the cause is your body thinking there's a problem and ending up creating that problem by attacking. But the other thing is, and I remember Donna Lordy telling me this, that autoimmune disorders tend to come in packs. So and I guess that's again because it is kind of your body generally attacking itself. If you have one, it's quite likely that you're going to have or develop others to go with it.
And that's the thing that I've kind of really only made sense of now, looking back, because looking back a long time, I think I was suffering from autoimmune problems. So about nearly 20 years ago, so this was a period when we'd made a big move in our lives. We began to live in the country, which was all a disaster, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, there was a big change. And I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism. But at that point, nobody talked about it as Hashimoto's. Nobody said it was autoimmune. And it was only much later. Which is the most
common form, isn't it?
Exactly. It was only much later when I was trying to investigate what I thought was fibromyalgia. And I ended up at an endocrinologist in a sort of desperate attempt to try and find a way to solve this problem I had. And he said at that point, basically all hypothyroidism is autoimmune. But nobody had talked about it in those terms. The other thing was that I had a premature menopause around that time as well. Now, again, when you look at things, nobody really knows what causes that. But there are definitely some theories that it is an autoimmune disorder, and presumably in some way your body attacks your ovaries or something. Then I had the fibromyalgia, which isn't supposed to be autoimmune. I mean, I think it was rheumatoid arthritis at that point. And then during that fibromyalgia period, I also developed a short-term, very acute autoimmune disease called ITP, which is idiopathic, I can't even remember the name of it, idiopathic thrombocytopenia purpura. I can't remember what it's called. But basically, your body attacks your platelet levels. So you basically don't clot. So this happened as well. And at the time, they give you mega doses of steroids. And it was really weird because I was really, really ill and in lots and lots of pain from this fibromyalgia. And I went on these steroids and all my symptoms disappeared. And I kept saying to the doctors, if fibromyalgia isn't autoimmune, maybe steroids shouldn't help it. Steroids aren't supposed to help fibromyalgia, so maybe it's something else. And looking back, I don't quite know why I got fobbed off, but I did. So it was then, as I say, I asked for a referral to a rheumatologist again because I was getting so much worse. And then very quickly they diagnosed rheumatoid arthritis. I think because my symptoms had got so bad that there was clear synovitis, so that the fluid around the joints was clearly inflamed. So it was kind of, it was a no-brainer at that point. So at that point, I got put on the standard treatment for rheumatoid arthritis in the UK, anyway, which is, again, loads of steroids, which was fantastic. It's like, yeah, I put on weight, but my God, I had energy. I was running around. It was wonderful. No pain, energy. And then they also put you on a variety of what they call DMARD drugs, which is disease-modifying and anti-rheumatic drugs. And you come off the steroids, you taper down off the steroids, and these other drugs, as the other drugs take effect, which is quite slow. And it was very definite that my symptoms improved a lot. I mean, I was desperate before I was diagnosed. I couldn't get off the loo. It was like my knees were so sore. I couldn't walk anywhere. It was just awful. And my wrists were sore. It was terrible. I would get, I had to book assistance. I travel quite a lot for work, so I would have to book assistance at airports and be trundled around in a wheelchair. It was, it was really bad. So obviously immediately I felt much, much better. So that was great. But I didn't ever feel that much better. So I ended up being, I would say, like 60% better. And towards the end of that first year on the treatment, I had my consultant's appointment. And I was kind of challenging him, saying, is this the best I can expect? Because in the UK, the first line of treatment is these DMARDs. But there are actually new wonder drugs called biologics, which can treat rheumatoid arthritis. And they are apparently absolutely amazing. But on the NHS, you don't get them in the first instance because they're very expensive.
Right. How do they work?
I don't know. I mean, in all honesty, sorry. Not only do I not know, when I asked the nurse, they said they didn't know.
They didn't know either.
I just knew they were called biologics. I don't know.
Yeah. But they weren't available to you anyway.
They're not available in the first instance.
So they would only go on to those if these other treatments weren't working.
Yeah. So a lot of people have very bad side effects from so it's a drug called methotrexate that you get put in the first instance. And a lot of people can't tolerate them. I could, although in the sense that I didn't get sick or anything like that, but my white blood cells kept crashing, which is a symptom. And I would have to come off them and then go back on them. And you're getting blood tests every week or every fortnight the whole time because they're monitoring your liver and kidney function and your white blood cell levels. So anyway, but I was on them for whatever, for better or worse. But as I say, a friend of mine who lives in Switzerland has these biologics, and she says they're like wonder drugs. So I was basically arguing for that and saying, I think I need to be on these drugs. And one of the reasons why I thought I should be on them, apart from how I felt, was that my inflammatory markers were still slightly elevated. And at this point, the consultant said, well, the reason your inflammatory levels are probably still elevated is because of your weight. And this was the first time anybody had mentioned my weight. My weight was high. I mean, I was, at that point, after the steroids, I was like a good 30 kilograms overweight. So I came out of that consultant's appointment, which was October 2016, I think, determined to lose weight. Only so I could show the consultant 6 months for my next appointment, 6 months later, that it wasn't my weight and I needed the good drugs.
Right. I mean, I can to a certain extent, I can see the logic. If you're carrying too much weight, then you're putting more pressure on the joints. So I can see the logic from that point of view. But it does just seem to me that there are these umbrellas that get put over you, and it can be too much weight. But the other things that doctors tend to talk about are that you have a progressive disease, and that they just start talking about pain management rather than and 60% improvement is quite a good thing. And they just seem to quite often just get you used to accepting something that is way below, what is quite possibly achievable.
I think, and I don't want to rant, but I might do.
No, go ahead and rant.
I think one of the things that really challenged me, now, hand on heart, I think, losing weight would have been healthier in any respect. So that's fair enough. It wasn't so much the pressure on the joints, right, although that might have been a factor. It was the fact that apparently there is a genuine association between excess weight and higher inflammatory markers. So he was saying the inflammatory markers are down to your weight, not the disease. But one of the things I did discover during this last 5 years is that as a middle-aged woman, it's very easy for people to not see beyond the fact that you're an overweight middle-aged woman who's probably a bit depressed because she's going through the menopause or something, even though I wasn't, all of these kinds of things. But the thing for the consultant was that, I think their hands are tied to some extent, and they're not meant to throw these biologics around left, right and centre because of the cost. And, I kind of get that. I see that, but I wasn't happy enough. So I was determined to lose weight so I could demand these biologics. Plus, I was having problem tolerating the other medications. So I was on and off them all the time. So I did nothing for 3 months, really, except eat lots of chocolate, as per normal, and panic. And then in January, after a fairly abysmal, as I say, chocolate-fueled Christmas, I thought, oh my God, I need to do something. And I couldn't face doing low carb or keto. I just didn't have the wherewithal. The thought of giving this comfort up just was too much. But I ended up, for some reason, coming across Jason Fung's book, The Obesity Code, and read it. And he didn't tell me anything I didn't know in terms of insulin and the impact of insulin on weight, fat storage and the like. But there's just something about it. I mean, he's such a brilliant writer. He's so no nonsense. He makes everything so clear. And he also talks about fasting, which I'd never ever done. So I just kind of thought, I've no choice. I've got about 12 weeks to dump some weight. So I started with a little bit of intermittent fasting. I would do maybe 1 or 2 days a week, 23 hours. I didn't go a whole day without eating. And I started back on low carb as I knew how to do it. And of course I started dropping weight. Of course I did, because it works, doesn't it? But then what became really extraordinary was the impact on my rheumatoid arthritis symptoms. So one of the things I'd been suffering from was a really, really bad back, which may or may not have been to do with the arthritis, but I had a terrible back. Had even been sent to in the previous year to get an x-ray, and there was nothing in the x-ray. But so I couldn't sit for more than about 20 minutes without having stabbing back pains. And I would have to go and lie down for a couple of hours, and I was swallowing ibuprofen like sweeties and all the right. And about, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks after starting this, I was sitting at my desk working, and I suddenly thought, I've been sat at my desk for 2 hours. And it was one of those moments. So I kind of got up and walked around and thought, I have no back pain. And let me tell you how remarkable this was, because the first day I did a fast, which was the first when I got the book, I remember that I was going out for dinner in the evening to a works dinner. So I didn't eat all day, which is great. I was very pleased. But I was actually wearing like one of these corset things that hold your back in place. So my back was that bad that I was wearing a kind of medical corset to cope with sitting at dinner for an evening. And 2 weeks later, I had no back pain. And then it just began to be clear that what the sort of residual rheumatoid arthritis symptoms were improving. So there's another moment, again, maybe 3 weeks, and I was walking the dog just round near us, and I was walking along the street, and I suddenly had this really weird desire to run. And I did. I just it was like my body was going, oh, we've got energy. Oh, we're not in pain. And I didn't run very far because I'm not a runner, but I kind of trotted along the street for 20 yards because I had suddenly got this energy and this momentum, and it was extraordinary. So what became really clear was that this was having what felt like a miraculous effect on my residual rheumatoid arthritis symptoms. And I was losing weight, which made me feel very happy. I was still slightly worried it was some kind of massive placebo effect. I was happy I was losing weight. But the fact is these symptom changes happened before I'd really lost much weight. So I maybe lost half a stone. And bearing in mind, I had like probably 4 stone to lose to come back to what would be regarded as a healthy weight. And that alone meant that I knew it wasn't just weight loss.
Yes.
Nowadays, if I eat carbs again, so if I overdo refined carbs, my symptoms come back even if I haven't put on any weight,
Yeah, so that completely nixes the sort of the stereotypical image that came into my mind about excess weight, impacting your joints. And I mean, I'm sure there probably is at some point a certain amount of excess weight that does that. But it sounds like, like you say, that was minimal in the cause and effect scenario.
And also, although my knees were bad and my back had been bad and my feet were bad, my wrist was very bad. My elbows were very bad. I never walked on my hands. I never did any handstands.
Exactly.
So my excess weight was never going to be a problem with that.
Yes.
So I mean, to cut the longer story short, what I ended up doing was coming off most of my medication. So partly because I was on and off because of the problem with the white blood cells. And I was feeling so good and I was so full of hope that there was a point where I had to come off and my GP was away and I just thought, I'm not going to go back on. I'm just going to sort of wait and see what happens. And nothing happened. I didn't feel any worse. So by the time I ended up in June, actually it was a second consultant's appointment then, and we just discussed it. And he said, well, your inflammatory markers are normal. You're not in any pain. We'll just take it from there. And that's the situation now. So I think it's important for me to be honest. I'm still on, there's one, what I call the little drug, something called hydroxychloroquine, which you get put on with the other drugs. So I was on 2 additional DMARDs on top of that. And this hydroxychloroquine is prescribed because apparently the combined action means that the bigger drugs work better when you're on hydroxychloroquine, but it's never prescribed on its own. It's not meant to control rheumatoid arthritis symptoms. And I would like to come off that, and I probably need to just get my act together to taper that down, because why be on anything if I can get away with it?
Yes, have you tried at all? Has there been any time where you've forgotten to take it or something and seen if it does have an impact?
I've definitely forgotten to take it, and I've actually forgotten to take it for quite a few days at a time sometimes, because I do kind of forget to take things. And yeah, it's been okay. I think I need a clear run at it, because what I want to do, and we can talk about cheating later on the diet, but what I want to do is have a really clear run when I'm absolutely clear that the only variable is going to be that I come off the drug. What I don't want to do is come off it and then also have maybe a bad weekend where I'm away, or, all of these kind of things. So I kind of need to gird gear up to doing that. But I intend to do that, because why not?
Yes, exactly. And I mean, all drugs have some kind of side effect, some obviously less than others, and the benefits can outweigh those side effects. But like you were saying before, that the other ones you want, I mean, when they're really affecting your platelets, that's certainly not something you want. So presumably, yes, the more you can come off, the better. Yeah, I mean,
the methotrexate and the other one that I was on, sulfasalazine, you have to be tested. Certainly at the beginning, every 2 weeks to check your kidney function and your liver function. Hydroxychloroquine, you don't have to be tested. They just assume they don't, there's not going to be any kind of immediately toxic effect. But obviously over time, anything is going to be toxic to some degree.
Yes, exactly. But it's not quite so worrying as the others. So I can see, like you say, well, you're hesitant to just drop it, and you need to properly plan for that. But yes, it sounds like that's something that's foreseeable. But you mentioned, we had a chat before we started recording. You mentioned, some of the other benefits that you notice from eating this way.
Where do I start? This is the problem. And it does make evangelists of us because of it.
I know you do have to sort of rein yourself in sometimes, don't you? Because you make it sound too good and people start not believing you.
Yeah, I know. And I have had, my friends have been very tolerant. So obviously when you speak about controlling rheumatoid arthritis symptoms with minimal drug intervention, I mean, that's extraordinary. But sometimes I forget that because my new normal is not to feel like I have that disease. And I only had rheumatoid arthritis. Well, at worst, I had it for about 8 years, even though I wasn't diagnosed then. The thing that feels almost even more transformative for me is because it's the effect on my eating habits. And by that, I mean my addictive eating habits. So I've lost weight. At the moment, I've lost about 25 kilos. And I'll be honest with you, I talk in kilos because I don't like to think how heavy I was. I don't really know what kilograms are. So I get 24 kilos.
Really? I've got used to it, actually. I made that change when I came to France, and I do actually, after a while, you can start thinking rather than having to translate it, can't you? But so yes, you're right.
You do the maths.
Sounds a lot lower, yeah.
But, I've lost all that weight, and that was weight I've been carrying for 20 years. And I have lost bits of that weight in the past and never kept it off. So like 22 months, I'm still edging down. I'm edging down as well. And the biggest other thing has been the way it's enabled me to manage a really strong addictive eating tendency. And that has been in my life 40 years. I remember, I say sugar is my drug of choice. And basically, I remember I started abusing it probably from my early teens.
Yeah,
so I would eat, total sugar addict. And those of us that are similar know what we mean by this, the sort of raging desire, emotional desire for this. So my whole life, since my whole adult life, I've struggled to resist eating, but particularly sugar. And I would include refined carbohydrates with that, because if you can't have chocolate, toast will do. It's not that low carb it's not solved it completely, but what it has removed is the kind of biochemical need, and certainly the biochemical excuse for it, like, oh, I'm feeling a bit tired, I better have a bit of chocolate to perk myself up. It's allowed me a kind of degree of biochemical stability, I would say, and satiety as well, hunger management, that has given me a foundation to really address this. Because what you find when you take out all of the excuses of hunger or low energy or anything like this, you're left with the naked psychological elements of what I think is an addiction. So you kind of have to, you have to say, yeah, fair cop, this is an addiction. And it means that you're kind of clear around doing it. So the intermittent fasting, I don't do a lot of intermittent fasting, but what it did was allow me to believe that I could do without food for more than about 3 hours. The fact that I could go for 8 hours, 10 hours, 23 hours without eating was definitely broke me away from a certain dependency on food.
Yes, it's very good at reminding yourself what real proper stomach growling hunger is as well, rather than that niggling head hunger. Oh, I fancy something to eat, when you know you can't possibly be hungry because you only ate 2 hours ago, when you've actually not eaten all day or not eaten since the day before, and you get that real hunger. It reminds you the difference in the signals.
I think as well, I think that's absolutely right. And I think as well is it not just makes you realize what real hunger is, but it actually makes you realize that you don't even have to answer to real hunger.
True.
So any sense of hunger, it was like, oh, if I don't eat immediately, I'm going to, drop dead. When actually you can feel hungry and go, oh, I notice I'm hungry. I will really enjoy my dinner in 3 hours time or what have you. So it was that ability to tolerate hunger, I think, as well, that was really extraordinary in terms of developing a different relationship with food. And then even though I was doing a lot of, I was doing low carb. I mean, the reason I don't call it keto is not because I don't think I'm ketogenic, is because I don't track and I don't measure ketones. So I'm quite sure in terms of the way I eat that it is a ketogenic diet. It's a very low carbohydrate diet. but I would still give in to the psychological pull of sugar, and I would still, not some sort of crazy binge, but I would go out, secretly and buy myself sugar and eat it, chocolate. And so it was that point when I just had to say enough is enough. And it was a Two Keto Dudes podcast. I work away, and I was sitting in my hotel room having gone and bought, German chocolate and eating it. And I was listening to a Two Keto Dudes podcast, and there was a woman on it, not like an expert, just an ordinary woman. And she said she had to treat sugar like an addictive substance. And it was that moment, i.e. total abstinence. And it was that moment where you go, yep, I can't pretend otherwise. I have to treat this like an alcoholic treats alcohol, And for me, although the blood glucose impact of things like refined carbs are the same as sugar, for me, the psychological or the emotional pull is sugar. So I could have a piece of bread and I could probably get away with it. It doesn't send me on a sugar binge. But if I have anything which is clearly sugar, I'm on the slippery slope immediately. So, I have found this brilliant tip. Actually, this is a tip because I used to try and keep track of my sugar intake, and I would put a little tick on my calendar. I have a wall calendar. I'd put a tick on every day that I didn't eat it. And of course, there were very few, alarmingly, there were far fewer days than you would like. And then it was earlier on this year, I did this thing where I counted the days, basically. I counted up. So every day that I didn't take sugar, I counted up. So I went from 1, and then second day 2, 3, 4. And the longer I left it, the more I thought, I don't want to drop back down. Which was fantastic. And my husband reminded me that this is what alcoholics do. People that are in recovery can tell you how many days, and I think they can say how many minutes and all that kind of thing, but I can just do the days. And that was amazing in terms of me sticking to the resistance of that.
Yes, interesting. And so you find it is certain substances that trigger you, or do you find it's a certain level? Because I find both. I mean, I would say that I'm, probably, yes, definitely a sugar addict, but also refined carb addict as well. I mean, I can't just eat a bit of bread. I will, that will be enough to, pull me back in as well. It's not something I can moderate. But I find two things. I find there are specific substances that will trigger cravings if I go near them, actually, even if I just start thinking about them sometimes. but also, and I don't tend to track that much because I can't be bothered, really. I'm a bit lazy when it comes to things like that. And also I just can't, I just find it messes with my head too much. But what I know is that I can feel if I've been eating too many carbs. If I was counting, if that count had gone up past a certain point, that I do start noticing that general carb cravings start coming back in. So for me, it's two things. It is the level of carbs that I'm eating, regardless of what they are. So I can be eating completely ketogenic, all ketogenic foods, but if I've just been having a few too many of the things that take the carb count up high, those cravings will come back, as well as if I had the more obvious specific foods. So I wonder, does that affect you in the same way, or do you find not so much? It really has to be those specific foods that send you over the edge.
That's really interesting, and I'm thinking about it. So, no, I don't think. I think my eating style is such that it is very low carb these days. So I suppose I'm eating a few veg, like broccoli or cauliflower or what have you, and meat or fish, and. So I don't feel, because I don't track and I can't be bothered with counting and all of that. And also I kind of think that if this is to be a lifestyle, I'm never going to live my life like I can't do this sort of counting everything as I go along, because then you're not living then. You're merely dieting. But no, for me, it is the substances. So I could have like lots and lots of broccoli or, I wouldn't find that I then accumulated and sent me over the edge. It's definitely the substance. I can get away depending on the circumstances. So if I was to cheat, and I don't really like the word cheat, but I can't think of another word. So it tends to happen for me if I'm out and I'm at a restaurant. Like I was out for my birthday on Tuesday. It was a beautiful steak restaurant, had fantastic. And they brought complimentary bread. So not only is it bread, but also you're not allowed to waste things. I mean, that's nonsense. So I had some complimentary bread. I had complimentary bread. I didn't want to be ungrateful that they brought this beautiful bread. And then when I had my steak, so there was like a planned thing, I'm going to have some chips. In fact, I didn't really have many. I just had like a couple. The next day, that doesn't send me over the edge, but they also brought complimentary petit four with my coffee. And I knew that if I'd had one of those, that would have been it. So no, for me, it's definitely the substance.
Right. Yes, that's interesting. And as you started on that, perhaps you could share. I like to ask guests what a typical day of keto or low carb looks like for you. Well,
it's actually changed quite a lot over the last 22 months, and so I've noticed like 3 different phases, I would say. My eating has got more and more simple. I mean, that's the extraordinary thing, which I think is also a good sign, because it shows a level of, to say indifference would be wrong, because I still love eating and I love my food, but I'm not as involved. I'm not as quite as obsessed and involved. It's not like my identity isn't built around what am I going to eat today in quite the same way. So when I first started, I was definitely low carb. I mean, I don't know if I was keto because I wasn't tracking, but I was very much like along the Atkins style. So I would be eating, bacon and eggs for breakfast. I'd have a big salad maybe for lunch, or some kind of stir fry with some meat, and plenty of fat, plenty of vegetables, lots of mayonnaise, all of this kind of thing. And then I would cook in the evening, for dinner, I'd be cooking things like proper dishes, which had like starch substitutes in. So I would have the cauliflower rice, the zucchini noodles, all that kind of thing. And I would have things like, I might make fat bombs or this kind of thing. Although I am a bit lazy about things like that. I enjoy cooking when I'm in the mood, but otherwise I can't be bothered. And then what actually also changed then, there's so much information out there these days on social media and on websites around all the kind of general health benefits around keto and low carb, which I find very fascinating, very motivating. And I think I got more interested in what I would call food quality. So what then started to happen, that I was still doing a very similar diet, but I was much more aware of things like seed oils and vegetable oils. So I wouldn't want to eat those. Mm-hmm. So I became more involved in the kind of environmental argument around food. So I was thinking about seasonal veg and food miles and all that kind of thing. So what happened was that my eating probably became more simple still and more whole food, just inadvertently, really. And then for about the last 3 or 4 months, it's like I've crossed a line and I've become almost carnivorous. I think I've been reading a lot about the impact of like zero carb, as they call it, or carnivory on autoimmune conditions. So I don't know if your listeners will be aware of the work that's being done by a group called Paleomedicina in Hungary, mm-hmm. which is what they call it, a paleo-ketogenic diet. So that's been interesting. Have I been able to gird my loins, to do it? I don't know. No, I haven't, and I don't know if I want to do it. But I've ended up things being really, really simple. So I have eggs for breakfast or brunch, because I usually do 2 meals a day.
Yeah, me too.
Eggs for brunch, or even that might be lunch. Eggs with maybe some bacon, or occasionally when I'm being extravagant, I might even have steak. And then in the evening, it's been pan-fried fish or meat, and maybe a few veg, but maybe not. And I've cut down a lot on the complexity of my food. And what I'm aware is that even if I haven't gone the whole hog and gone, pun intended, and gone carnivorous, I definitely, that the lower carb I go, the less I'm bothered by food cravings and the better I feel.
Yes, I think I would agree with that. And yes, the more I drill down and the stricter I am, my cravings definitely diminish for the sweet things, the more of the things. And I don't know how much of a sweet tooth. Well, I do know how much of a sweet tooth you have, but I don't know how much you satisfy that with making some of the keto treats and things. I find, and I do like those things, and I do make them. Again, I'm similar to you. I think we all go through these different phases of the different things we make and we eat. And I used to make a lot, and I make them far less frequently now. I tend to make them, when someone comes around for dinner or something, and they're expecting a pudding. So I will make something, whatever, a keto cheesecake or something. But those are definitely the things, even though they're perfectly keto, they're compliant foods, they trigger those old addictive tendencies, and I find it basically impossible to moderate them. So I tend to just make the smallest possible portion, really, that's enough for me and my guests. There might be some leftovers, but even when I carry on eating those, there's only so much I can eat. I don't make a great big one because I know I would just be back into it until it had all gone.
Yeah, I made some a while ago. It's actually, my husband doesn't follow it, but there was a period when he said he would do it for 2 weeks before he went on holiday one year. And so I tried to look after him, and because he does like his carbs, I kind of made some things like granola, so grain-free granola. It's sugar-free, obviously. And I also made some waffles, and they were lovely. I didn't even put any sweetener in them. That's I'm remembering. But they were made from coconut flour and egg, and they were lovely. And I ate them compulsively. Yeah. They were absolutely perfectly keto. And there was something around I think there's a tactile element, actually. It's like, the texture and the mouth feel, if you like, of eating something that was a waffle triggered that desire in me. And I'm always wary of talking about this business, because it sounds like in order to do low carb or keto successfully, you've got to give up all of these things. And for some people, it's fine. And some people love all the cooking. And, it's like, oh, great, do your cheesecakes and everything. But for me, it's evolved. It's not a force. I don't go, I must now stop eating these keto treats. I'm not as interested. And the biggest thing for me has been this freedom from my own food desire, shall we say. Now, don't get me wrong. I keep saying I love my food. I love it. I enjoy what I eat, but I'm not as caught up in it in the same way. It's like all the unnecessary extraneous issues around food fall away. And it is this sense of freedom that is really remarkable. And I could never have imagined that I would be like this. And sometimes I'm a bit sad. It's like, that was a big part of my life, but would I give it up? No. I mean, it's the difference is great. I feel pure. I don't mean in a moral sense. It's like I've sloughed off all of this stuff that wasn't helping me, this baggage around food, and substituted it with obsession around keto. But yeah, it's weird. So the kind of reducing things has been more that I don't want to do this stuff anymore, rather than I feel I oughtn't to. Mm-hmm. Which is great. I mean, if you're not trying to force yourself into it, it's just something that's going to come naturally, isn't it? Like you say, it's just been a natural progression. Yeah, it is. It's evolved. And I forget that. And sometimes when people talk to me, because I have a Facebook page, and sometimes people ask me questions, and I have to be really careful, because if I told them what I ate, they would be, I will tell, I'll be honest, but I think people might be horrified. It's like, oh no, have I got to eat like that? And I'm going like, no, eat like that if you want to eat like it. But if you don't eat, just eat, do it your way, which is one of my mantras. But yeah, it's very liberating. There's no doubt about it. Yes, I think that's interesting to actually tell a bit of the history. Like you say, it can sometimes seem quite stark telling people, what you've eaten. I did an interview. There was some students that asked for some people to do interviews on the forum the other day for a course they're doing. And I think their project was around low carb. And I said,
I tell you what, I'm going to give you more of an average day because, yesterday for dinner, all I had, I cooked up some chicken thighs and I'd planned to have some vegetables and all the rest of it with it. And after I'd cooked the chicken thighs, and you know what, I can't be bothered. I'm just going to eat 2 chicken thighs with some mayonnaise. And it just sort of, to you that sounds fine, and to me that sounds fine, and to most of the listeners that doesn't sound abnormal at all. But I could kind of see the look of horror on her face because it does seem a bit stark. So I think that's very interesting when you just mentioned that progression, and just to explain to people, well, actually this is where I started and these are some of the phases I went through, and I did used to cook all the things, and I had that phase where I keto-fied things and cooked the sort of carb equivalents, and now this is how I eat. And perhaps, when you ask me next year, it'll be something different. The whole point is that it evolves and everybody's different, and you don't have to do what I'm doing.
Yeah, and I think the trouble with evolution is that you forget what it was like at the beginning, or the danger is it when you talk to people. But one of the things is that this way of eating has allowed me to trust my own appetites, and that is also one of these phenomenal things. And I know, particularly for women, it may well be for men as well, but for women, that is a completely alien concept. And I am so aware that often, like women I talk to, they ask me for rules, who are interested in my diet. What should I eat? What can I eat? What can't I eat? And they want rules. And I keep saying, you need to do it your way. So the only thing is you cut carbs low enough. And for me, also, that means reduce. The sugar thing is a separate issue for me, and it's an addiction issue, and that also affects how I do things. But all you need to do is cut carbs low enough, and your natural human mechanisms of appetite and satiety will reassert themselves. And no, of course, you don't know that until you try it. And instead, it's how many carbs, how many this, can I eat this, can I eat that? Do I have to eat eggs? Do I have to eat meat? And I'm kind of sad about it, actually. I think, well, since when did it get so difficult for us to feed ourselves?
Yes, it doesn't have to be difficult.
But until you've experienced this, and I had a really interesting experiment. I called it an experiment, like mega cheat. I went away on holiday in September, and we were traveling around Europe on the train. And I just thought, I'm just going to eat whatever the hell I want. So I thought, rather than having that mental battle, will I, won't, I just thought, say in advance, eat what I want. And, Eastern Europe, cake, I wasn't going to not eat cake in Eastern Europe. And it was a really interesting. So I didn't eat sweets. I thought, I know what that does to me. So I'm not going to eat chocolate in like bars of chocolate or anything, but I would have a cake with chocolate in it if I wanted. So various things were very interesting. Number one, how easily carbs got their claws back into me. So I did 3 weeks on holiday, and it took me another 4 weeks to get back off it. So I did nearly, best part of 2 months. I got back to a certain extent, but it was very difficult. So that was one thing. The other thing was how unsatisfying it was, the food. And when you talk about satiety, people go, oh, yeah, being full. It's not being full. There's such a difference between feeling full in your stomach because of the bulk that you've got in your stomach and feeling sated. And that, I knew that low carb food did that for me, but it wasn't until I went back to eating what was typical for me, typical way of eating before that, a carb fueled. I didn't binge. It wasn't like off the scales crazy, but I ended up having carbs for breakfast, carbs for lunch, and carbs for evening meal. And I was hungry the whole damn time, as in unsatisfied. And then I was actually craving a nice, some pure meat by the end of it. Like, just give me some nice fatty meat, and maybe some eggs.
Yes, you talked about that purity thing, and it is that you because I'm somebody that things go wrong from time to time, and you do get to a point, and I do go completely out of control in a way it's not good, but it gets me to a point where, I just feel like I absolutely feel the need and desire to get back to keto because everything about it, just I'm craving that. I need to feel good and that sort of purity that you mentioned before, because it just, like you say, it sloughs away all that horribleness.
Yeah. But the danger is when we talk about it to people, and obviously your listeners, I suppose most of them are already committed to this way of eating. It sounds difficult and holier than thou and strict. Yeah.
You have to be really careful what words you use, don't you?
Yeah, and the purity is just, I suppose, no, I'll tell you what it is. I'll tell you the right word. It's clean.
But even that
but
can
speaking
has
as an
similar
addict,
connotations. Yes, it's very tricky.
Speaking as an addict, I feel clean. When I eat these foods, I feel clean. But yeah, none of this is kind of, oh, you ought to do this, be a good person, all of that kind of thing. It's just, it just becomes easier and easier. But as I say, I cheat. When I say I cheat, I fall off the wagon. So I'm very bad in restaurants because, well, I don't like making a fuss. I don't want to be a fussy eater. So when I have in restaurants, I'll often have the burger and I'll say I don't want the bun. So I keep the bread off the plate. But then if I said, oh, I don't want the bun and I don't want the chips and I just feel like one of these like dreadful fussy eaters. So I say to myself, and I still do this all the time, I won't have the bun and then I won't have any of the chips. And of course I always eat the chips. So I should just know myself, and then I don't like waste. Like I said to you, well, if they put them on the plate, I'm going to have to eat them. But generally at home, if I keep off sugar, so that is like as in proper sugar, I can control things reasonably well. So it tends to be more in social occasions or occasions when I'm out of the house that I can be strict. Must admit, I had half an apple last night, which is obviously very bad. But I had it with cheese. And my husband had the other half. But I think having half an apple isn't going to, I cannot be the sort of person that having half an apple means I'm a bad person.
No, exactly. And I think that's where it's important is to, keep moral judgment completely out of it.
Yeah.
And it's the whole, know thyself and the different things that are problematic and not problematic for you. If you can have half an apple and a piece of cheese because that's something that you really fancy from time to time and it's not going to negatively impact you, then that's not a problem, is it? And it also highlights the fact that, just how adaptable all this is and how many faces keto has. And, they're all perfectly acceptable. And yes, it's fascinating, and that's the biggest takeaway from me about this podcast is talking to different people each week and seeing just how so many different ways of doing it all work. They all work perfectly well, and it's all about isn't it? Just finding the one that's right for you.
Yeah, the one that's sustainable for you.
Yes, exactly.
Over the long term.
Yes. Well, it's been fascinating talking to you, and I think we have a lot of things in common, especially when it comes to food addiction.
Yeah.
You've dropped a few tips as we've gone along, but what is your top tip to wrap up with?
Well, I have dropped my tips in because my big tip was the do it your way. But I've said that, so make it work for you. Make it your lifestyle. The other tip, which actually it struck me this morning when I hopped on the scales, and it's focus on process, not results. Now, obviously the results are important, but I came up with this a long while ago through other dieting history. But what I realized was that if I went very much by the scales, if I got on the scales having cheated and I got away with it, it reinforced the cheating behavior.
Good point.
So don't get me wrong, I get on the scales. I still have, I would love to lose another, half stone or so to be at my proper target, but I keep an eye on my weight. But what I focus on, and what I would recommend people try and focus on, is following your eating. And if I say plan, I mean, I don't want to get into all of that controlling thing, but your eating style. So compliance or adherence is really the only measure of success. So if I have followed my eating style, I've not fallen off the wagon with carbs, even if I haven't lost weight that day, I have succeeded, because it's only over time, because it's a massive behavior change. So what you need to do for success is enforce that behavior change so it becomes second nature, the new normal. You don't even have to think about it.
Yes, that's good. I like that. And it certainly sounds like it's something you live by and have done very well with.
Well, most of the time.
Though that's always the caveat, isn't it? Most of the time.
Yeah, I do really, and that's the thing I've said about cheating. I do not want to set myself up as somebody who's doing this perfectly at all. So it's, and I still manage it.
I don't think there are many people who are really, and I think it's interesting hearing about those imperfections and how we deal with them, how we resolve them, how we learn from them and move forward. That's really educating and helpful to other people. So yeah, there's good in the flaws.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure talking to you today, Rosie.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. You're doing great work.
Oh, thank you very much. To get the resources and links from the show, please go to ketowomanpodcast.com. Are you my next extraordinary woman? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you want to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomanpodcast.com. If you fancy joining me on this exciting adventure and want to help me create new episodes, please go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/ketowoman, or simply hit the support button on the Keto Woman podcast website. It's thanks to the two keto dudes that I'm hosting this podcast. So please consider heading to their Patreon page at patreon.2keto.com and help them bring you more podcasts like this one. Please help other people hear about and find this podcast by reviewing the show on iTunes and Facebook. Every star and review really does help. It doesn't go unnoticed by me, the people who regularly like, share and comment on my posts. Your support means the world to me. Thank you. This week's end quote was recommended by Katie Breedlove and is from Dr. Zeus. You're in pretty good shape for the shape you are in. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.